through the process of parental alienation, we're really forcing kids to live in their anger. And how many adults do we see as we walk around in our world just living in anger and projecting anger and uh, living in anger and fear? And that's a negative outcome for parental alienation. Probably the opposite of what a loving parent would really want for their
Mhm.
children.
Absolutely. Now, in my personal case, there was one other emotion, and that's only because my case was reached an advanced enough level where I didn't react with anger first, I reacted with apathy. And so you could think of that as in an advanced case, it would be apathy first, then anger, fear, and loss. Apathy because, well, if you care about this other person, then again, you're showing fear of building a connection. But apathy is a much more hurtful emotion because you're conveying to the other person, I don't even give you the time of day. I don't even give you the slightest bit of emotional connection. Even if it was anger, at least you have some sort of emotional connection. But to just stonewall and give nothing and be a complete robot,
Okay.
that is a stage that I personally reached with my mother. And when it's challenged, that's when apathy will turn into anger. But at that point, apathy is the easier way for the child to deal with this alienation process, simply because it's easier to not feel anything and pretend the feelings don't exist than it is to sit and be angry all the time. Because when you're angry, your eyebrows are scrunched, it takes up so much energy. And then mentally, you start to feel like this emotional fatigue, and then you start, uh, in a sense, burning out. So, how do you deal with that? You put those emotions in a bottle, you put it on the shelf, and you ignore it and let it ferment. And that's what a lot of these children are doing. And that's what I did as an individual.
Right. And what are some of the ways that that impacted your life? Bottling it up,
Um,
apathy,
so
suppressing your emotions.
so I am somebody. It's harder to tell, but I am somebody who's very methodical and very logical in thinking. I grew up believing that emotions were a hindrance to our lives, and I grew up believing that um, to be emotional means to be weak. And I made that association very early on in my life. And now this hurts me in multiple ways. Part of it, in the biggest way, is that I was losing out on emotional connection with anyone simply because if I was allowing myself to believe that emotions were a form of weakness instead of a form of establishing connection, I would fall into these patterns of behaviors where I was always distant. I could talk about history and trauma and past experiences, but I would do it without emotion. And you might think, how is that even possible? And it is. And so here's how I would do it. If I wanted someone to go away, I would bring up a very conflicting trauma that somebody would think about it, emotionally process, and say, oh my God, I can't believe you went through that. That sounds so horrible. And then they feel awkward just being in your presence because that's the only thing they're thinking about. Now, subconsciously, this is not something that subconsciously this is the intention. Consciously thinking, this wasn't something I would think about. It wasn't like, okay, I'm just gonna drop, this basket full of trauma on someone's feet and make them freak out so they'll leave me alone. No, it was just but it was an easy way to get people to leave you alone because people would feel like the moment they talk to you, they're afraid that they're going to, uh, in a sense, either bring out that trauma or they're going to have to hear more about it and feel responsible for it. It's a very ugly feeling. So part of that was just falling into a line of behaviors where I was creating emotional distance from people. So if you create emotional distance, you don't have to feel emotional, and then you can feel like life is going as you should. And that was a very big mistake of my life because I remember there was a time where I was in this process of rigorous self work and trying to figure out where my faults were. And I remember always feeling like I was just kind of drowning. I was just going through life like I was in the middle of the giant ocean and I was just trying to find things to hold on to. And through a lot of meditation, a lot of thought, and a lot of personal work and reading books and a few other things, I started to recognize that that drowning feeling was that I was drowning in my own emotions because I was ignoring them so long and for so much that everything was always above head level and I was just trying to kick my way up and stay above the surface and just get through life. And it wasn't until I made that recognition, it wasn't until I experienced that I was able to realize that emotions have a purpose in our life, and that emotions are there not because it makes us weaker, but in fact, it strengthens our connection to other people.
Yeah, emotions are everything. There are navigation systems through the world. There are radar system. There are our emotions are power. There are energy in motion. But back to what you were saying when you were saying you were emotionally disconnected from others because of the original disconnection with your mom, right? If you
Yep,
can't receive love from your mom and be deeply connected to her, you can't ultimately deeply connect with another human being later on. And that I think we just keep underscoring that point. But
absolutely.
I'm so glad to hear that you processed all of those emotions because so many of us don't, and we're not taught how to, and we're just walking around like human bombs projecting out our anger and living in our fear, and all of that blocks our potential.